things that really opened this up for me, that really showed me what was possible, was Alan Watts's writing back in the 70s. He was one of the only people who was writing about Zen and about the Eastern wisdom teachings and talking about it in a way that people in the West could understand, what he was talking about.
Some of his video, I see that he has videos. I should check him out. But is that back? So he started back in the 70s.
Yeah. He was actually a minister, and he had a very difficult childhood with a lot of abuse, and he ended up living on a houseboat in San Francisco with Werner Erhard. That's how Werner Erhard got started. He was living with Alan Watts on a houseboat. And he studied Zen. Watts studied Zen and Eastern religion and so forth. The only book that I've ever kept over the years, and I'm talking about 50 years, right? Because I was never somebody that accumulated a lot. I let things go. But the one book I still have is called The Supreme Identity, and it was written by Alan Watts. Yeah. And there's one chapter in that book in which he talks about the idea that all of the things that, and this is the thing I think really captured my attention, and it took years for me to really get what he was talking about, right? But in one chapter, he said that all of the things that people do, including prayer, yoga, meditation, anything like that, study, practices, anything that people do has only one purpose, and that is for the person doing that to find out it doesn't work. That's right. Has only one purpose. And that's consistent, after understanding that years later. And then he says, in that particular chapter, he says a lot more, but years later it became evident to me that that's simply part of the process. Simply part of the process is that you, when you hear of this, when we talk about this process, you have to deal with some ultimate contradictions, paradoxes. For example, you're introduced to these teachings and practices, and you're hearing a description of a possibility, possibility for freedom, a possibility for being happy, a possibility for having peace, a possibility for satisfaction. All the things you really want, really what you want, anything that you think you want in terms of possessions or relationships, it's all to get that stuff. It's all to get that stuff. So you might as well go right to what it is that you really want, right? And then, upon recognizing this, upon hearing this, whether it's through reading or through, for some people it hits them naturally through a very intense experience they go through in life. There are a lot of different ways that this comes about. Yeah. But when this possibility is seen for what it is and is realized and recognized that it's real and that you can have this, the first thing that you do, because no other tricks, no other way to do it, is you do something about it, don't you?
Sure.
Yeah, you do something about it. And the teachers that are out there to teach, they give you things to do. Go to a retreat, read this book, listen to this teacher, practice these things, right? You're doing, right? And then along the way, part of the teaching that you're listening to, part of what you're doing, right, is that you are exposed to this teaching that is supposed to be a very high teaching, and this teaching says that you can do nothing. Right? You've been already doing, right? And it's and then the teaching says you can do nothing. In fact, there is no you to do anything. So now what? Right?
Yeah.
So now what? So now what? That if you hear that and you let that into your consciousness, if you process that, you've got to be at a you've got to find yourself in a dilemma. Because if I accept these teachings and the teachings tell me that agency is an illusion, that I never did anything, I can't do anything, there's nothing I can do, then how do I proceed? And I think that's what Alan Watts was talking about in that book, The Supreme Identity. Because he was saying all the things you do that you think are going to take you there, get you there, at some point in the process, part of the process is to discover that's not true. So you start out doing things, and the things you're doing have value. Practicing meditation has value. You can calm the mind. You get yourself more grounded. You can reduce the amount of the neurotic craziness that's playing in the awareness all the time. So you start to get value out of that. And that then leads to this idea of, I'm on the path, I'm going somewhere here. I'm going somewhere because I feel less agitated. I feel calmer. I have more understanding. I understand more than I understood before. And then you hit this reality that that's not it. That's not it. And you can't get to this from there. You can't get to this from there. You can't get to this in time. You can't get to this in time, right? So anything that you're doing with the idea that it's not that way now, but it can be that way, and so I'm going to do things to get it to be that way, that whole thing collapses, right? Because there's no doer, there's no time, there's nothing you can do. Now what?
You're asking us.
Now what?
Just let go, right? At some point.
Well, but isn't letting go something that you can do?
That's the paradox, right? They've been talking about.
Yeah. So that there comes a time when that is what there is to deal with, and this really becomes an opportunity for you to begin to move into considering non-duality. Okay? Because don't forget, what does non-duality point to? It points to the idea that there is no separate self. Okay, now we're on to something, right? If there is no separate self, isn't that consistent with there being no doer? Right? There's no separate self, then that's consistent with there being no doer. Okay, so, all right, so now, obviously there's something here to recognize now that I couldn't recognize before because I was operating as if I could do something, and now I see that's not so. And it's not so because the idea that I'm separate, that I'm a separate self is not so. And along with the separate self idea came the doing and all the rest of it, time, right? And the idea that this experience that I'm interested in will happen in the future, that's time, right? But the teachers tell us that's not true. It can only happen in the present moment. And the teachers tell us you can't make it happen because you can't make anything happen, so that's not going to work. So it's kind of taken away, it's taken away what you thought would work, it's taken away the actions you wanted to take. And in the beginning of the process, you're pretty much told, no, do this, do that, practice this, practice that, read that, So then, and this is what I was talking about before, so then you could turn around and say, well, the teacher gave me the bad information, right? Because I was listening to my teacher. The teacher got me all the way to this point and then told me I was nowhere. Then told me I didn't get anywhere. I didn't accomplish anything, okay? So at some point, people get pissed off, But after that passes, if it passes, they, if they can't let go of that, they'll just go away and find somebody, they'll tell them what they want to hear, right? But if you can get past that, you can start to entertain non-duality, because what does non-duality offer us? Well, non-duality says, The only problem is that this separation notion is an illusion. That's the only problem. And if that illusion is seen through and recognized that if there's no separate self, right, it means that non-duality is real, all there is, and then the only way you can talk about reality is to say this, right? Because it's not you and me, that's separate, separate selves, right? So now you can only get to and this is where you get into some of these high-end teachers that talk about non-duality, like Tony Parsons. If you want to hear somebody talk about pure non-duality, listen to Tony Parsons, For most people, it just makes their head spin.
Yeah, I've listened.
Yeah, just makes your head spin. But what he's talking about is non-duality in the sense that all there is, the way he would talk about it, is all there is what's happening, right? It's not me and what's happening. No, all there is what's happening, and part of what's happening is me happening. But I'm not separate from what's happening. See what I'm saying? So then you see it solves the non-doer dilemma. It solves the non-doer dilemma, right? Because now there's no separate me to do anything. Now everything that I do, the universe is doing. Now everything that I do, the cosmos is doing. Now everything that I do, the unified field's doing. Now everything that I do, awareness itself is doing. Right? And then the issue of agency, the issue of whether there's a doer or not, is not a problem anymore. Yeah, because it's like the Buddha said, deeds are done, actions are taken, and there's no doer thereof. Right? So what's he describing? Non-duality. Actions happen, right? Deeds are done, things happen, right? But nobody's making it happen. Right? There's no doer thereof. He's describing non-duality, right? So if you take this back to try and look at, well, how the hell did all this get going like this, right? Well, in the very beginning, a consciousness comes into existence, and it comes into existence and resides in a human form, right? Birth. Consciousness comes into existence, or we say consciousness comes into existence, but consciousness is always in existence. So this phenomena of consciousness and human form meet, come together, and then there's just pure consciousness. And at that point, before the baby starts the process, at that point it's non-dual. The baby doesn't know the difference between its body and what's not its body, right? That's non-dual, right? So then at some point in this process, the I am comes into existence, right? At some point, this consciousness becomes an identity, the baby's identity, right? Maybe even before language, there's a recognition, that there's an I am. Their consciousness exists as an I am. So, doesn't have a name yet, right? But we say I am, there's an identity in existence, right? When that identity comes into existence and it forms the I am, then there is a separation that takes place. And the separation that takes place is the I am occurs, and then the next step is I am conscious. Now, the I am came out of consciousness, did it not? Yes. But then what happens when it exists as a separate identity, then it says consciousness came out of me. You see the switch? It does a switch. First there's consciousness, right? Consciousness, right, appears in a human form, right? And that consciousness at some point takes on an identity. That consciousness, there's an appearance of an I am, right? There's an identity now, right? And then the next step is that identity came out of consciousness, did it not? Yeah, no problem, right? But once it's out of consciousness, and then it takes on a separate identity from consciousness. Now it's not consciousness anymore, it's separate from consciousness, right? And now it's asserting its identity as independent from consciousness, right? And then, that goes on to become I am the body, and that's separate from other bodies. I am the personality, and that's separate from other personalities, right? But that it all begins with the first separation, right? First, there's just consciousness, right? Then that consciousness resides in a body. And then there's this I am that appears, right? This idea that I am an identity, right? But that came from the consciousness, right? And the first thing it does is it deny what just happened. It decides, no, I am real. That idea that came from consciousness concludes that it is real. It is the consciousness, and it has consciousness instead of it came from consciousness, right? And that's the beginning. That's the beginning. So it comes from non-dual to dual, and this process is just reversing the process. That's all. The process is reversing. Of course, you've been around a long time developing a lot of characteristics and all the rest of it, right? So this idea that you are a physical body and that you are separate and that you are personality has had a lot of time to get truer and truer and realer, seem to be so anyway, right? Because we live in a world where around us we see the same thing, right? So everything speaks for that being the case, right? Everything speaks for that being the case. And so it's concluded that it is the case, and life goes on, even though it's not the case. It's only one step in the process of the human evolution of the human life. But the next step is not a step that will happen naturally. The first step happens naturally, and it happens to everybody, right? The next step doesn't happen naturally, and it happens to everybody. No, the next step happens only if, right? Only if there is a spark or a recognition that because of the experience one has been having in a human body as a personality, right, is clearly not fun, is clearly not fulfilling, is clearly that shows up in terms of the person starting to not be so happy all the time, That shows up in terms of the person kind of feeling a sense of emptiness, a sense of uncertainty, a sense of insecurity, a sense of something's missing, something's wrong, I can't put my finger on it, maybe I try and figure it out and try and blame it on my parents or blame it on life or blame it on politicians or blame it. But none of that really seems to be the truth about it. It's just because every time I fix what I think is the problem's still here. Something's wrong and I can't put my finger on it. This is the experience that human beings have when they have not yet completed the process of manifesting in existence. They've not yet completed the process of manifesting in existence. Why? Because they have not yet returned or not yet realized that the completion of the process of coming into a human existence is to realize your actual nature. You needed to go through a process to identify with the physical body and identify with being a separate self in order to be in the world of time and space. Had to happen. But if it ends there, right, then it's an incomplete situation, and you really haven't realized the full potential, the full possibility. And so life is designed in such a way to kind of keep poking you about it in all kinds of ways, by having you experience unworkability in your life, by having you experience fear and anxiety and depression and concern and confusion and all that. So what that ends up with is that human beings become seekers. All of humanity becomes seekers. I know we talk about that specifically in spirituality, but if you really step back and look at it, all humanity are seekers, right? Isn't everybody seeking happiness? Now, they may be lost souls, right? They may be totally unaware of the reality in which happiness is available, but they're still seeking, right? That for a lot of humanity, seeking happiness equals seeking money, doesn't it? Yeah. So they're seeking happiness, but they have it associated with money, right? Or seeking happiness means, seeking fame, or seeking control, or seeking getting what you want, getting possessions. You know the game. All you got to do is look around. You can see the game being played everywhere all the time, right? But the reality of it is that seeking for happiness comes from a misunderstanding that happiness, first of all, doesn't exist, already exists, and secondly, is in the world somewhere, and you're going to find it in the world, and then you can have it, and then you'll be happy, right? Anybody that is a serious seeker and really pursues it comes to a point where they realize that this is a bankrupt operation. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And then a certain number of people start to let go of what's not working and begin to get involved in something that offers more of a possibility. Spirituality, for example, right? And then they begin to pursue the spiritual path, and in that process of learning and practicing, you start to become exposed to the truth. And the truth is, happiness is yours to have anytime. Happiness is always available to everybody all the time, right? However, you have to come to realize through the practice, through the teachings, through your own direct experience, to stop considering it to be something that's outside of yourself, and start to pay attention to the experience of the awareness that is always available, and see if you can notice that when you move your attention out of the activity of the mind, out of the mental process, out of the mental activity, and you let it reside in the awareness of what's happening in the present moment, if you practice that consistently, people start to experience unexplained experiences of happiness. It starts to begin to reveal that happiness is something that is the experience of being you. That's what happiness is the experience of being you. What does that mean? The experience of being you means the experience of being not the body, not the mind, not the psyche, not the identity, but the experience of you is the experience of the awareness itself. And when that experience is being experienced, there is peace, there's happiness, there is a sense of well-being, there's a sense of satisfaction. In other words, everything that was sought after is available. And then that seeking process is over, and the experience that becomes available is no longer one in which there's anything lacking. It's no longer one in which you're searching anymore. It's no longer one in which you're confused all the time. Now there's some clarity. Now you can start to experience what it's like to be a human being, and to experience what it's like to live a human life with the possibility of that life fulfilled. Possibility of the life fulfilled. What's the possibility of a human life? To be happy. That's the possibility of a human life, to be happy. In other words, to just experience being here is the possibility of a human life, and to experience that experience is fulfilling and complete. That doesn't leave you wanting anything, doesn't leave you lacking anything, doesn't leave you fearful, doesn't leave you confused. No. And the full realization of that, the completion of the process, is one in which you literally disappear. This is what they call in the Eastern teachings the idea of no self. The Heart Sutra, I mentioned it here, right? If you want to read something that goes directly to the bottom line in one brief chant, it's a chant, but you can just read it, right? If you contemplate that, it can be very powerful to take you right to the truth experientially, the Heart Sutra. It's quoted by a lot of teachers. But one of the things the Heart Sutra tells us is the final stage of enlightenment, the final stage, what Angelo calls liberation, right, is the experience that there is no you, that there is no self. So the mind will go, that doesn't sound very good. That doesn't sound very good. In fact, that seems to sound a lot like death. Right? The final teaching is there is no self. That's what I've been trying to avoid. Right? Well, that's only because you don't get it. That's only because you don't really understand what no self implies. No self implies complete freedom. No self implies that there's no body for anything to happen to anymore. No self implies that everything that you were worrying about was a waste of energy, because there is no individual separate you that has a separate life and a separate story that is really separate, right? All that may be so, right? But rather it being you and your life and your separate story, it is this. It is this. It is this. It is this happening. That's the only way it can be spoken of, really. And that doesn't really speak about it, but, you know, this. What do I mean by this, right? See, you can actually get very close to experiencing non-duality just by following that, you know. What do I mean by this? Where is this, this? Where is this, this? This is here. Where is here? Here is here. What's here? This. You see? And from that, what's here, and from that, this, that's beyond concepts, right? Everything is happening. That's where your thoughts come from. That's where your body comes from. That's where your emotions come from. That's where your perceptions come from. That's where everything is coming from. And there is nothing separate. There's nothing separate. It is non-dual. It's the unified field. You are the unified field happening. And so one way to talk about that is when you sneezed, the entire universe sneezed. So you got to get over your attachment to the idea that you want to be separate, right? And your attachment to the idea that you want to be separate is ignorant. It's stupid, right? The idea that you have about wanting to be separate, the attachment you have to wanting to be separate is the source of all your suffering, right? But the reason the attachment remains is that you're afraid you'll disappear. Really? Really? If there's no self, if you're really not a physical body, and if you're really not a personality, if that's all just appearances, right? Just like it's just like something you're watching on TV, right? It's only there during the time you're watching it, right? It's an appearance on TV. It's going to come and it's going to go. All of that is an appearance, right? But your identification with it and the way you've been relating to it has you relate to it as if it's not an appearance, as if it's real, if it's reality. This is a real body. This is really my body. I'm really who when I sign my name, I really am that person. I really am. Ask everybody; they all agree, right? They all agree because they're in the same situation, right? And so the idea of letting go of that, this is where it comes. This is the bottom line. It really comes down to letting go. The idea of letting go of that brings up fear that if I really, really, really let go of the idea that I am this physical body and that I am a personality and that I exist in time and that I have a story and all that stuff, right? If I really let go of that, what will happen to me? What will happen? It brings up the fear of death. Brings up the fear of death. What will happen to me? If I really, I understand the teachings and I let go a little, I try and let go, right? But if I let go completely, what will happen to me? The only way I can conceive of that is that I'll disappear. The only way I conceive of that is that'll be the same as dying. That'll be the same as dying. So that becomes a challenge, you know, and this is often spoken about in the teachings and in the processes, you know, that when that time comes. Adyashanti, one of the famous contemporary teachers, he said when it hit him, he was sitting in his little hut in the backyard meditating, and he was doing a lot of meditation, right? And, you know, he was experiencing what I spoke about earlier in terms of part of the process. He was frustrated, you know what I mean? He was trying harder, we're meditating longer, right? And then finally lightning struck and it hit him, And he had been a competitive bike racer, so he was in excellent physical shape. And when this hit him, his heart started to pound, and he started to feel terror, right? And his heart started to pound harder and harder and harder and harder. And he knew about heart rate because of his career as a biker. And he realized his heart was pounding higher than it did when he was racing as hard as he could race. And he realized if my heart is pounding as hard as I think it is, I could probably die right now, right? And then after that, he said, I don't care. I don't care. If this is what needs to happen for me to wake up, and if it means I die here, that's what it means. And he just let go, right? And then his heart rate came right back down, and he had woken up. He had the experience. So for most of us, there's going to be that challenge, that fear that comes up that has to do with letting go. I mean, for all of us, it's going to come up at some point when the body's ready to drop, right? Because you got to let go, right? But what I said in my book and what the teachers tell us is don't wait for the body to drop. You can let go now. Now, that may not be easy, it may be scary, but you can do it, and you can trust and have faith in the fact that if you let go completely, right, so that you stop holding on and believing in and trying to live as this physical body and the personality, if you let go of that completely, right, what you'll discover is nothing changes. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. The body doesn't disappear, the body doesn't die, the personality doesn't disappear, the personality doesn't die. The only thing that is different is who you are. And who you are is the heart of the matter, is it not? Yeah. So the only thing that's different is who you are. And now, the thoughts keep coming, the physical sensations keep coming, the emotions keep coming and going, the situations in your life keep coming and going, right? But you're not attached to it anymore, and you're not identified with it anymore. So it can come and go any way it wants to, and you can be relaxed and enjoy yourself because it's a movie now. That's the way it occurs. It's a movie now. Even the aspects of the movie that are dramatic, even the aspects of the movie that involve intense emotion, right? They're now experienced as interesting and exciting and an example of the aliveness of the energy of life rather than something that you're trying to escape from. See what I'm saying? You don't go to you don't go to the movies and sit in the dark looking at a movie that you paid good money to watch because you expected it was going to be entertaining. And when it gets exciting because of the intensity of it, right, most people don't get up and walk out. That's why I came. Right. Right? But in life, people get up and walk out, don't they? What do I mean? They get up and walk out, right, by distracting their attention, right? By suppressing their emotions, right? By taking actions to try and get away from whatever's going on, right? And at the very same time, once things shift where the way you see things is different, what you were running from, you end up running to. What you were running from, you end up running to. Instead of running from fear, right? You find fear very exciting. Right, because most of what people experience fear about is not information that says that you're going to die soon. No, it's things you're afraid of because of you're in this physical body, right? And if you are somewhere that's high, that you could fall and die, right? The body starts setting off alarms, right? But if it's a bungee jump, you know you're not going to die, or probability is very high that you're not going to die, and you can still experience the excitement of dying. You see? People who have yet to wake up will do things like that just to feel alive. People who are awake don't have to bungee jump. They can be that scared anywhere. All right, see you next time.